Welcome back to my channel. My name is Payton. Today I will be sharing a video about telling my family that I'm leaving the Mormon church. So it's kind of an interesting story because I didn't tell anybody just abruptly like my husband did, who just called them up and said, hey, I'm leaving. Mine was much more of a slow kind of breadcrumbs, asking questions, sharing my concerns over time. For context, if you're new here, I was born and raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was a very active, kind of teetered between Orthodox and progressive. I was Orthodox on a lot of topics and progressive on some others. So it's kind of where I stood, but I was very active, went to church every Sunday. I could probably count on one hand how many times I missed church growing up. So my mother was born and raised in the church. My biological dad was born and raised in the church, and then my dad, who adopted me when I was a toddler, was a convert to the church, but very active nonetheless. I think my parents held very, very orthodox views on basically everything, where, as I said a minute ago, I kind of teetered back and forth between orthodox and progressive depending on the topic at hand. For example, I was very progressive on things like LGBTQ plus marriage and equality. I always found myself walking a fine line between orthodox and progressive views within the Mormon church. For example, I held pretty strong beliefs on the traditional teachings such as regular church attendance, temple attendance when you're old enough to do so. The word of wisdom was really important to me. Modesty even made a lot of sense to me, even as a teenager, where, I might have certain tendencies to want to dress a certain way for certain things, fashion related, boys related, whatever the case may be. I did genuinely believe that those feelings were from Satan. So I did genuinely have guilt for those feelings and felt that true modesty was important. Whereas I also held progressive beliefs such as LGBTQ plus rights and equality. That can kind of be a difficult thing for me to talk about sometimes because I still struggle with guilt for having an attraction towards women that I've had my entire life, that I even talked with my mom about it for a little bit before she passed away, and I had been viewing lesbian pornography. I feel like this is a lot to share on the internet, and I'm struggling to decide if I want to even post this with this information in it. But I spent my entire life trying to explain those feelings as being something that it wasn't. My mom helped me to understand that those feelings were from a bad place and a bad presence, and that I would likely outgrow them, which I never did. Spoiler alert. And I think the reason I can still feel guilty for that to this day is because, I'm happily married to a man, and I have children, and I have, the picture perfect, very happy life. And I genuinely do feel that I have that. I think our biggest struggle is, finances and trying to constantly increase our income to help with bills and our family and food and groceries and whatnot. And I can even feel guilty talking about that because I have nice things, and when I feel like it's difficult to talk about having financial struggles when you have nice things because it doesn't look like we do, and there's plenty of people who have it worse. But yeah, I have everything that I ever wanted, so I don't really know how to explain it. My husband likes to tell me all the time that I'm not alone in these feelings and these struggles, and he's like, I'm sure that there are other women out there just like you who have those same feelings and experience, potentially the same level of guilt for their feelings, and maybe even people who are married and have, their forever partners and their person who still have those, thoughts and feelings. And he's like, tries to help me to not feel so alone in that. This is a lot to put on the internet. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to end up putting this part in, but if I do, wow. I think it would show maybe a level of like growth and confidence in myself and being able to share something like that. But I don't know. I've shared small little bits of that information on the internet before, but not in that much detail. So, and there's so much more detail that I could go into that I think would just cross some probably community guidelines on YouTube. So I won't do that. Anyway, back on track with, my orthodox and progressive beliefs within the church. I also never felt that there was anything wrong with tattoos and piercings. I knew that they were considered wrong by all of the people around me and everything that I was taught growing up, but I didn't deep down feel that that was an issue. While at the same time, if I saw people with tattoos and piercings, there would be kind of an immediate judgment of maybe that they didn't have God in their life or something like that. I don't know. Similar to coffee, where I strongly believed in the word of wisdom in the sense that I felt eating clean and taking care of our bodies was important. I understood, not consuming alcohol because it's, literally poison for your body. I occasionally have alcohol nowadays. So when I say that, I don't mean disrespect. That's literally what it is. I might grab a drink and I will still tell my husband this is literally poison. And so I understood those things and I believed very firmly in those things, but I didn't understand coffee. I was questioned about the coffee a lot growing up, especially because I grew up in California where nobody really knew what being Mormon was and what it meant. And so when people would ask me, why coffee, there were times where I thought that it was because of the caffeine. And then people talked about like, oh, well, your mom drinks Diet Dr. Pepper or Diet Coke and those have caffeine. I'm like, yeah, that's right. And I ended up really loving Mountain Dew while I was in high school. That was my favorite soda and that had caffeine in it. I think I ended up learning, somebody talked about a certain ingredient in coffee and tea that is addictive. That wasn't caffeine, it was something else, and I can't remember what it was called. And so I kind of used that as my answer or my reason, but I think I never quite understood it either. So I also believed that men in the church should go on a mission. I was raised my entire life that one day I would marry a return missionary, and that was a reoccurring teaching in my home. I dated a guy in high school who was not a member of the church, and I hadn't told my parents about it. I told them that he was my tutor, my math tutor, and he actually came over and did help me with math when I was struggling my sophomore or junior year. I cannot remember. There was a year where I started struggling a little bit. It might have been my junior year, maybe in between the end of sophomore, beginning of junior year. That actually sounds about right. But yeah, he actually did help me with math. He was in college, I was in high school, so he was at a higher math level than I was and was actually able to help me, and still to this day I am grateful. So I guess in my mind it felt easier if it was like a half lie. So he really did help me with math, but he was also a boyfriend. And I remember having read my patriarchal blessing around this time, and I heard that I was reading in it that I would marry a return missionary, and this, getting married in the temple and raising my children in the church would bring happiness and joy in my life. And so, which any woman in the church is going to pull out their patriarchal blessing, and it's likely going to talk about marrying somebody in the temple and raising your children in the church if you got your recommend before marriage and kids, of course. It's likely going to say that. There's a website somewhere that has where a bunch of people have uploaded their patriarchal blessing to these websites and to show how like so many of them are just like verbatim the same things. But I mean, it makes sense. We're all promised, you know, the same blessings within the church as long as we follow the same rules. And so it's where a lot of people have stuff that's like really particular to theirs, or, you know, few and far between say something like this. But I digress. I was very orthodox in the, you know, anti-feminism within the church and women wanting the priesthood. I remember like cringing at that. I thought it was the weirdest thing ever because, and I think for me, it's just because that's just not the way that it was. And that's not the way that God designed the church to be. And I even went through times of feeling like, you know, maybe it was more of this traditional approach of, you know, we're going to work the men harder and we're not going to give all of these duties to women who are more, you know, delicate and should be, you know, helping with children and feeding the family and cleaning the home and maintaining, you know, a spiritual Christ-like home, which even today I stand on a very much so middle ground on this topic because I don't believe that, you know, full feminism or full anti-feminism is the answer. I think the idea of women cooking and cleaning and being that part of society and the home and raising the children and whatnot makes sense from a traditional standpoint and an evolutionary standpoint. If you think about how we got here, women are naturally more emotional beings and are more naturally inclined to do those kinds of things like cook and clean and care for children. I think that's a very, very common thing in women, but I don't think that it has to be that way if that's not how some women are, not what they're drawn to. I don't think we should raise our children to lean into anything just because it's a stereotype. I firmly believe in science in this home, so everything is very science-based, and my husband and I are kind of like agnostic, leaning atheism, like atheists, like I feel like I'm all over the place here, but we don't believe that there is a higher power, or I don't want to say that we don't believe in it or have faith in it. The reason we kind of say like agnostic / atheist is because we were feeling very much so atheist, but we were also like, who are we to say that there is not a higher power or deity without the evidence? Because a lack of evidence doesn't mean it's not there, if that makes sense. So we kind of go agnostic a little bit, and then where I differ from my husband on the agnostic standpoint is I have hope that there is something. I'm not so sure that there is, and I get a little bit too scared to fall into that mindset because it was really painful to leave the Mormon church and to lose that belief. It was probably just as hard as losing my mother from this earth to cancer because it was my entire life. She was my life. She was my best friend. The church was everything. God was above everything and everyone. So to lose faith in that, I mean, I can just like feel a hole in my chest just talking about it. It's just like heavy. So one of my primary reasons for leaving the church all started and stemmed from questioning authority within the church. So plenty of bishops, stake presidents, general authorities who do gross stuff. And I'm not going to sit here and say that all of them are. I genuinely don't believe that. I have a family member who is a bishop right now, who is one of the best people that I know. There are plenty of people who hold authoritative callings within the church who I believe are genuinely deep down great, amazing people. I want to throw that out there. But there are the people who get in and do heinous things. And this is not just within the Mormon church, obviously, but I am talking about my experiences in the Mormon church. So I feel that it is perfectly reasonable and okay for me to be talking about these things. Men in power in the church committing these acts and behaviors should be removed. I know that majority of members across the earth would agree with this statement. If people in these high power roles are committing these acts, they need to be removed. If illegal things are happening, it needs to be reported. And they need to go to jail. That simple. I guarantee that the majority of the church's members would agree with this statement. It doesn't happen almost ever. Majority of the time, it's swept under the rug because the church doesn't want bad PR. They don't want everybody to hate their bishop who's now stepping down, who has to stay in this ward because this is where he lives, and now everybody knows that he did this horrible thing, and so we don't want to tell anybody about it, because this is exactly what happened to a family member of mine and Colin's, my husband, who was hurt by a Mormon bishop, stalked her family and children, and it took several members and general authorities to finally get through, because they were saying, no, he can stay bishop, no, he can stay bishop, no, he can stay bishop, you need to sit down and be quiet, you need to get over it, this is your problem, not his problem. He said sorry before there was finally one person who said no, he needs to be removed. So then you start thinking, for all the people who say that this is God's church, which would be everyone in the church would say this, and you bring up these situations and these people and they say, well, this is human nature. You're going to find these little people and these little details who get in any religion and any organization who do bad things. You cannot keep that from happening. And I'm like, okay, I will give grace on that because I agree. Don't say that they were called of God. They were called by men in the church who did not know that they were committing these kind of behaviors, or maybe they did. There's this whole thing within the church where people differentiate what information is coming from God himself, what is true revelation from God the Father, and what a person is saying, whether or not they're saying it's coming from God or their own hearts. There's a lot where they talk about, the gift of discernment, or where I'm like, okay, well, all of these men that not only I'm interacting with, but people all over the world who go on Mormon Stories podcasts or the news and share their stories about these Mormon bishops or stake presidents or general authorities who are doing things to kids or all of these things, and then they have a whole team of men behind them who all knew about it and swept it under the rug. There are way too many people doing this, where this is not God's church. You cannot expect me to just put my full faith and trust in these men who say that they're speaking for God and they have all of this power within the church, which, mind you, I've shared this with family members of mine. This is one of the concerns that I brought to a family member of mine when I was addressing questions and concerns I had within the church. And I said, this is not okay. This is not right. And he agreed. And he's like, you need to stand up and use your voice and not be scared to fight for what's right and say, this is not okay. This person needs to be removed. This person needs to be removed. And it's like, there's only so much that I can do as a woman in the church. There is only so much I can do. I don't have the final say. The men have the final say. So I have stood up and tried to help for the people that I love and people who, are doing these things. It's not enough because all of the men have the power. So I'm not some kind of feminist over here who is full-blown feminism by any means. I'm also not, completely anti, but a part of me always wondered, not always wondered, but I guess within the last few years wondered how much of this might change if there were more women who held these higher power callings within the church, women who are naturally more emotional and in tune with people and good with children. Why are we having untrained grown men alone in rooms with little kids talking to them about the law of chastity and what it means to be following that? Am I going to say that there wouldn't be bad women that would get in there and that women can't do these things. No, I do think that you're going to get people who do gross stuff in any organization or community or whatever. But the important thing is when you find out that those things are happening, those people need to be removed and held accountable. That's the biggest thing, and that doesn't happen in the church almost ever. So these are my experiences. These are my opinions. This is my perception of everything. Just want to throw that out there. Another thing that was really difficult for me in my whole faith deconstruction was the whole Book of Mormon translation. So if you've been here on my channel, you've seen me talk about this a lot. If you're new, basically, Joseph Smith had a rock or a seer stone or whatever you want to call it that he put into his hat, and the rock would light up words that he would need to then communicate to one of his scribes who would write for the Book of Mormon for him. And this was the translation process. Because the light was so bright and you could not see it, like the point of putting it in the hat and putting his face to the hat was because that's how he was able to block out all of the light to see what the stone was saying. What would you think if somebody told you that today? Would you be like, yeah, that sounds like a totally sane, normal thing that happens to people? No. So I'm like, that's really weird and interesting and not believable at all. Why does the church teach that Joseph Smith had golden plates right here? Why are there pictures of him looking at the golden plates and writing it down? Because he also supposedly didn't do any of the writing. Emma did writing, Oliver Cowdery did writing, he had scribes, okay? He put his face in the hat, the rock glowed all these letters, and he said them to one of the scribes and they wrote it down. Where were the golden plates? Sometimes it says they weren't there at all. Sometimes it says they might have been sitting there on the desk covered in a cloth so nobody could see them. They were not touched in the process of translating the Book of Mormon. Excuse me, what? So why did Laban in the beginning of the Book of Mormon have to be decapitated? Which these were Laban's family plates. These were passed down to Laban. They were his plates. A random stranger shows up being like, hey, God says I need those plates. It's like, I don't know who you are. Like, get out of here. Gives him 3 chances. And then Laban gets drunk and is decapitated. And Nephi puts on his clothes and pretends to be Laban and got these plates. He's like, I will go and do the things that the Lord has commanded. And then you're teaching this story to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds in primary, teaching them the song, I will go, I will do the things the Lord commands. I know the Lord provides a way, He wants me to obey. I will go, I will do the things the Lord commands. This is literally from this scripture story of Nephi. That story is literally teaching children to do absolutely anything for God. And mind you, God is not standing in front of them. God has not shown to them. This is something you have to have faith in God because you don't see Him, you just learn about Him. And the way that your faith turns into knowledge is not by actually seeing Him, it's by having a really strong feeling in your experiences, which the feelings are the key word here. Your feelings are what get you to a knowledge. I don't want to teach my kids that. I want to teach my kids that their feelings and emotions are very valid and important in any experience that they have. And I want to teach them how to manage their feelings and emotions to be able to grow in society in a very healthy and productive way. And I want to teach them to think critically and analyze things and how you find true knowledge in seeing things right in front of you. Anyway, so basically, that all of these things, along with, changing doctrine and policies over the years, like race in the priesthood, if you're not familiar with that, Black people, and I'm pretty sure also like Indians or anybody with like brown or black skin. To my knowledge, it might just be Black people, but I think it's also like American Indians and stuff like that, was literally taught in the church that they could not make it to the celestial kingdom, or because they couldn't do these temple practices or ordinances, they couldn't pass a sacrament, they couldn't hold these certain key authoritative positions within the church. You can't have the priesthood, anything, until 1978. That was not that long ago. My mom was 5. So the church kind of seems to be behind the times a lot when it comes to stuff that they teach. I genuinely believe that one day LGBTQ plus people will be welcome in temples and practice ordinances, and it's going to be like this big thing that they're now allowed in the celestial kingdom, just like Black people and stuff like that. I think that's going to happen. I've talked with family members who do not think that that's going to happen, but I do. And I just think it's going to be way behind the times when it does. But anyway, things like that, I'm just like, why should I trust what these men in the church are telling me if I know there's a bunch of horrible men around here making horrible decisions who can dictate whether or not I can have a temple recommend and perform these ordinances within the temple in order to be able to make it back to my Heavenly Father again after I die? Why is all of that in the hands of like these men in the church? And people say it's not, it's in my hands because I have control over my actions, but they're coming up with all the rules and they're saying that all the rules are coming from God, but the rules are changing, always changing. There are rules that have been the same from the beginning to now, but there's also a lot of rules and doctrine and things that have changed. And then doctrine is supposed to be unchanging doctrine. Raising the priesthood, that whole thing, the priesthood ban, that was a doctrine that they then later said was a policy. They changed these things. They used to say they were doctrines, and they're like, oh, that was just a policy. Even if it was, you're still supposed to follow the doctrine and policies and rules of the church. So I'm like, why should I trust them why should I live my life feeling like I'm this horrible person for having an attraction towards women, or questioning why I have, some aunts in my family aunts or however you want to say it, who are lesbian, and cousins who are gay or lesbian, and siblings who are gay or lesbian or bi or whatever. How am I supposed to sit here and think about them and feel for them when it's taught that that's horrible and disgusting, when one day, in my opinion, it's likely going to change? All of these LGBTQ plus people within the church are deleting themselves, to say, for YouTube guidelines and censorship and all of that. What are they gonna then have to say for all of those people who are hurt from this, what's now doctrine, and potentially will one day say it was a policy? Why should I live my life trusting so wholeheartedly in these supposed doctrines and policies and teachings of the church when it could be just man-made rules and doctrine and policies this whole time? So I'm like, I want to live my life in a way that is fulfilling to what I believe is right and whatever I believe is wrong, and live my life according to what feels right to me, and keep an open mind that I may not be right, and I can learn and develop and change my thoughts. So I have notes over here on my computer from one of the conversations I had with a family member who I was addressing all of these concerns and questions with, and I cannot go through all of it in this video. I might be able to one day if somebody wants, but I'm not going to disclose who this family member is. But yeah, there was a lot of back and forth before I finally said, like, I can't take this anymore, I'm not responding, because it got kind of disrespectful, probably on both of our ends, but at a certain point I was like, I can't continue doing this, if that makes sense. But yeah, this person is thinking that Colin removing his records from the church is like a final gamble, is the words that they used, and said like, one has to be willing to gamble their eternal salvation. Are you, either of you, now so sure that you're right that you would gamble your eternal salvation? So we kind of responded talking about how it feels like a final gamble if you believe that that is what happens after we die, that there's this eternal salvation with God after we followed all of the rules and teachings of the LDS Church. If you're kind of teetering back and forth between whether or not you think that's true, then removing your records could be like a gamble in that sense. Whereas we'd gotten to a point where we didn't believe that that was the case at all anymore. So it didn't feel like a final gamble at all. Where, for clarification, I left my records in the church for the sake of my family like this. I think it makes them feel better that I have all my records in the church, because Even if I'm not living all of the teachings of the church and the gospel, which I am in a lot of ways, to be honest. There are very few things I'm doing that are different, like not attending the church or the temple anymore and producing content about how I disagree with the church. So who knows? But most of everything else I do in my life is according to teachings of the church and being kind and genuine, loving wife and tending to my family and their needs and cooking and cleaning and being the stay-at-home mom and trying to keep my mind and body and soul healthy and all the things. So I don't know. So we actually, when I say we, I'm talking about my husband and I, because we kind of worked on these responses back and forth with this family member. And at the time, we still believed in like a heavenly father or God and Jesus. We weren't quite sure if we felt like they were one or two beings. It felt comfortable to say they were two beings because that's what we were raised and taught our entire lives. We still felt like they existed and that they influenced our life for good, and that we still believed a lot of what the church preaches, but we also disagreed with a lot of the necessary teachings to be considered worthy members. And so this family member said, what teachings? So I said the word of wisdom, the importance of the sacrament, temple and baptisms, tithing, the law of chastity, purity culture, modesty, etc. It said, I believe that any man or woman has a right to do whatever they want with their bodies and have relations with one another as they'd like to, as long as both adults are in agreement. I will no longer sustain or support anyone in their church callings unless I know them personally and can make that decision based off my own personal judgment. So for context, a lot of times people will get called like, oh, here's a new bishop. For everyone who agrees, like you raise your right hand and basically saying that I agree that this person can be bishop. And most people just do it anyway. And they'll say like, oh, is anyone opposed? And if you raise your hand and you're opposed to it, like I've literally never seen that happen before. So you would be the only one raising your hand in a huge audience of people. So that could be embarrassing. But also, most people are just prone to raise their hand and sustain this person as bishop or whatever the calling may be, regardless of whether you know the person or not, because you believe that they were like called of God. So of course they can be in that position. I also said I don't agree with priesthood holders who have any authority over me or anyone else other than themselves and their own children. I don't believe they can speak for God, and they cannot tell me if God will accept me into his kingdom or not. I also said that I felt like all this fluff was unnecessary and very cult-like in my eyes, and this person had a lot of responses to that. Like, they were curious about, if we believe in Jesus Christ from the Bible, me saying that I believe any man or woman has the right to do whatever they want with their bodies in relations with one another as they'd like, as long as both adults are in agreement. This person goes, I was not aware that you no longer believed in our Savior and his teachings, at least in the Bible. Is there more that maybe I'm missing? Which I did not say at the time. And I said I wouldn't support, sustain strangers or people that I didn't know. He's like, will you require the same of your children's school teachers or bankers or other financial advisors or mortgage lenders, the cooks at restaurants you frequent, the farmers and packers and inspectors of the food and other goods you buy, and for any number of people you may not trust regarding some facet of life? Or is it just LDS people in the church? I know this seems pointed, I'm sorry about that, but you can't go through life living in a bubble trying to protect yourself and your family from everyone and everything, not even all the big bad cultist Mormons. Anger has taken over your faculties of reason. You will find neither truth nor peace there. You may not believe in now, but you will after much sorrow and grief. Which, mind you, I'm not angry at all. And I haven't experienced anger per se. I have experienced some hurt and frustration with feeling like I was lied to in a lot of senses, but I've never felt anger, where I think this was more of a projection of this person's own anger. So yeah. And they also said, who told you what cult-like means and how is that irrelevant? Sounds more like something you read and simply decided to believe over your life's experiences. Which, if you Google the BITE model, it describes what classifies something as a cult. I'm not going to say whether or not all cults are bad or whatever. I think many people can live in a cult their entire lives and thrive and genuinely be happy in that. Fine. I don't think the word has to be as offensive as a lot of people make it out to be. Could Taylor Swift's fan base be a cult? Maybe. I don't know. I'd have to look into that. But if it is, let's just say, for example, it is. Let's say we look into it, all the things check out, and it is. Okay, then what? Who cares? My issue is I want people to have informed consent. I want people to know what kind of communities they're in, what they are truly practicing, and where the initial grounds of everything started, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm all over the place. I need to just move on, or this is going to be the longest video ever. Kind of like goes over how some of these specific teachings within the church, we talk about how if you don't dress modestly or if you drink coffee, you burn in hell for the rest of your life. And where this family member is like, that's not taught, that's not real. You've been taught false doctrine or false teachings if this is what you believe. And so we kind of went over the fact that if I don't want to wear my garments and I want to wear a tank top and short shorts in the summertime, and I love coffee and I want to drink coffee every day, and those are not things that I'm willing to bunch on because I live in St. George, Utah, and it gets hot as balls here, and I want to wear that, and I like coffee. I think it tastes good. I think it's better for you than energy drinks, and that's what I want to have in the morning, and I make it myself, and it's not full of sugar or anything like that, and what's wrong with that? If that's how I want to live my life, and I tell these things to a Mormon bishop, I will not be allowed to have my temple recommend. Any bishop will be following the guidelines of the church if they do not let me use my temple recommend at the temple because I'm living my life in that way. If you cannot have your temple recommend because you are not worthy of it, and you cannot perform these ordinances within the temple and have these things, you cannot make it to the celestial kingdom and live with Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ for the rest of your life. You can't live in the happiest, idea of heaven if you are not a worthy temple recommend holder. So in those cases, you kind of start to move down blocks of heaven. There's like 2 more blocks, and then there's like a burning in hell kind of place. But I'm pretty sure the lowest block of heaven is supposed to be similar to earth. I can't remember. And then one up is like slightly above that. And then the celestial kingdom is like better than you could ever imagine, which is weird considering majority of people won't make it there. And all of our family and loved ones will be living somewhere else and all of these things. This is why when people leave the church, it can be so hard for the family members because they want you to be there with them, living out eternity in the celestial kingdom in the happiest place of places. And if you leave or you go against that, you can't be there. And so I'm like, what kind of heaven is that? If there is a heaven, I want to live out my eternity with all of my friends and family, regardless of their beliefs and all of that. Like plenty of my friends and family members have different political beliefs, different religious beliefs, different hobbies, different jobs, different ways of life, different outlooks on how they like to do things, and that doesn't change whether or not I consider them family or friends, because I love people for who they are, and they don't have to be just like me and believe everything just like me to be good, genuine, kind, loving people. And that's just confusing for me. All right, so this instance was really difficult to say the least. I mentioned to this family member that I do not believe that people in the LGBTQ plus community who are living their lives the way they feel they should and in a way that makes them happy, that they'll be punished for something that they don't believe is wrong. They can be just as good or bad as someone who's heterosexual. I've believed this my entire life. Or at least didn't understand why it wasn't taught that way. I knew, if you knew that something was wrong and you did it, then there was going to be, a consequence or a punishment for doing something wrong. Whereas if you did something wrong, and I just mean like, in my household growing up, if I did something wrong, but I didn't know that it was wrong, or I didn't believe that it was something that was wrong, I wasn't punished for the most part for not knowing. So I didn't feel that it would be that way in heaven. I was like, if gay people don't know that living a gay lifestyle is wrong, why would they be punished if they didn't know that it was wrong? So it kind of started out there and then ultimately changed to like, I didn't believe that it was wrong either. And then I didn't believe or understand why, an all-loving God, would make people like this and then make that a sin as well. Like if you created these people and then said that, your natural feelings are a sin and all of that, it just didn't make sense to me. And this person then compared them to, without using the exact word, grown adults who like children, compared it to that, where they have, this natural tendency and feeling where you could say, if you believe in a God who creates somebody with these feelings and then says that this is something that's not okay. So in the sense now that this happened a while ago, I can see where he pulled that from, but I took it extremely the wrong way because at face value, that sounds like this person was comparing these kinds of people to gay people, which are completely different things. And so I was very angry and I basically could not even speak or continue after. If you can't tell by my body language, I'm extremely uncomfortable even talking about it. I am not saying any of these things. Again, I just want to say this came from somebody else's mouth. I'm just the messenger here. But my biggest pushback on this is that through science, we know a lot about brain development and what's happening at different stages of brain development. Hence, the legal age of drinking at 21 in this country, or there's a different legal age in England. Maybe it's like 18 or something like that. I don't know. There are different ages for being able to purchase alcohol or do different things, and there's a reason that there's a legal age of 18 before you can, buy your own place or have certain jobs. Why there are other jobs that let you start as early as 16. We've learned a lot through evolution and science and experimenting with people's brains and learning about how they develop. A child does not have the mental capacity or awareness, understanding, decision-making skills, any of that, to be in a true consenting relationship, especially with an adult who has a fully developed brain. We want someone with a very underdeveloped brain. There's power control, power imbalance, if you will. That's dangerous. That is not the same thing as two women, adult women, consenting to be in a relationship. Or I might even argue, 2 8-year-old girls who have the same brain development. That's even fine. Like, to me, these are my opinions. This is my perception of the world. Anyway, so there's so much that I could get into with this document that this family member and I shared where we were going back and forth. There's so much on there. If you're interested in me doing another video where I maybe delve in and just talk about this document, I will. I still am not going to say who this was just for privacy reasons. I think that's disrespectful. But yeah, I can do another video where I talk more in detail about some of these things, but I can't fit it all into this video because I want to make sure that I'm really leaning into the topic of sharing these feelings with family members and ultimately telling them that I was leaving the church. I had another family member that I was talking to about some of these issues who was the very hardest person for me to tell, and that was my dad. I really cried over this one a lot. I think I talk about this a little bit in my faith crisis video part 4 on my channel. My faith crisis playlist will be in the description box below. But yeah, he was the hardest one for me to tell. And I think I always felt that he was very proud of me and where I was at in my life and where I was going. And I knew that this would be kind of some detrimental information for him, or at least I really felt that way. And so I shared a lot of my questions and concerns with him over time, kind of as I was deconstructing, and he definitely tried to help in the best ways that he could, but he seemed very supportive and loving and understanding of how I was feeling, and even stated at one point, like, if that doesn't feel like it's the path for you and that's not where you should go, then don't. And I remember being like so shocked to hear him say that, because I would would never think in a million years that he would essentially give me permission, not that I needed it, to do just that. And I know when I ultimately told him that my husband Colin removed his records from the church, he was saddened by that, and he was honest about it, and he wanted to be clear that he didn't want us to be, offended by that statement. It's just, and I'm very understanding of the conditioning of the church and all of the things that are taught, why somebody would be sad if your family member left. Like, that ultimately means you're not going to be with them for eternity. So that makes sense to me, but he was still very understanding of what led us to that decision, and still very obviously wanted what was best for us and wanted us to be okay and happy. And that meant a lot to me to hear coming from him, especially because he was the hardest one for me to tell. Mind you, every single time I post a video on YouTube and I go to share it to Facebook, because I share it on multiple social media platforms, I think about him and I see a disappointed look on his face as he's scrolling through his phone and comes across that post every single time to this day. And I don't know why I care so much. I don't think he watches these videos. I don't think he wants to, because it's like ex-Mormon content. But the face-to-face support and understanding meant a lot to me regardless. I had another family member who told me that they kind of understood, because in the scriptures it talks about Satan taking people away from the gospel. Even like the strongest of people that you wouldn't think would ever leave would end up falling away into Satan's grasp in the last days. And so it was very understanding to her in that sense. I remember being offended by that comment, but I just went with it because I understood the indoctrination, I guess. But she never made a comment like that again, so who knows? But I never forgot it because it was just like weird. My sisters were very loving and supportive of me. My younger brother was very loving and supportive of me, and actually learned a lot about the church through some of my videos and just his own research. He swore up and down that he'd only seen 2 of my videos ever regarding faith specifically when he decided to be on my channel. His podcast is on my channel as well, and it might be in my Faith Crisis playlist as well, so check it out there. But he did his own research and he found Mormon Stories podcast, and he started learning about all of this stuff and ultimately fell away from the church too. And he's still a minor, so but he doesn't live with her parents. That's a whole different story, but I don't need to share his life story. Yeah, his story I think is in my Faith Crisis playlist. If it's not, I'll add it, so it should be in there by the time this video is uploaded. But yeah, he was very loving and supportive and ended up kind of falling away himself. He also went into a whole potentially Christianity thing, and then maybe atheism, I don't know, but it's really hard when we've lost our mother to cancer, when you want to believe that you will see her again, so that's a really difficult thing. I had other family members who were very loving and supportive who also left the church in the past, and they became non-denominational Christians. And they were a lot of people leave the church and they go full-blown anti, they go to the other side. And I think that might be kind of what I'm doing now that I'm thinking about it. I might be doing exactly what they told me not to do, but I still feel love and support from them. My boss and very good friend of mine is an active believing member and was kind of with me along this process and was really encouraging of me, and still to this day loves and respects me for who I am and believes that in the afterlife, everything's going to work out the way that it's supposed to, and everyone is going to be happy with wherever they're at. And she just ultimately believes that that will be the case. And so she has been very loving and supportive. So that's good. But for the people who, I do still feel from almost everyone who's still an active believing member in my family or friend group, I feel that there is a certain level of disappointment. I'm not sure if my best friend watches these videos. If you do, you know who you are. The first letter of your name starts with an A, just in case you don't want to be on blast on my channel. Ooh, I might cry thinking about her. she was very loving and supportive as well. And sometimes I want to talk with her about all of these feelings and things that I learned and discovered that were hard for me. A part of me feels like she might be understanding and potentially even like confused at some of the stuff too. And it's not that I want to put her in a state of confusion or anything. I think I just like want a friend who just gets my confusion and gets what led me to that decision and just really gets it. I have my husband, who's also my best friend, and he's got a social life, man, but I don't. And that might be why I've really leaned into YouTube, because I really don't. Even this best friend that I'm talking about, she lives like 6-7 hours away from me. I don't have any friends where I live, and that's really embarrassing and depressing to put on the internet. But I'm getting to a point where I'm like so socially depleted that I've considered going back to church just to make friends. And I was talking about it with Colin, my husband, and I'm like, but are those the friends that I want? More who are not going to understand me? And I'm like, my best friend who lives many hours away, I'm pretty sure goes to church, and I'd love to find more people like her. Growing up, you're in school and sports and activities, and in church you've got youth groups and those kinds of activities, and church on Sundays, and all kinds of social situations that you're kind of forced into that also force you to make friends and meet people and expand your social group. Ever since I got married and had kids and I work from home, I don't have any groups or communities or things that I'm put into. So I don't know what I would do without my husband. I think that's what keeps me afloat, but I don't have anybody else. And that's hard. I want to find people who understand me and people who love self-development and who love to have fun, but they're not like, I don't know. It's not what this video is about, so I don't need to get into that. But I had a pretty even mix of people who were very saddened and disappointed and even slightly angry. And I had people who were loving and supportive. Tough thing is, a lot of the people who were loving and supportive also didn't fully understand me leaving. They just loved me and were fully supportive in that. I think the only person who really got it was my little sister Riley, because she's delved into the history and she knew all of these things. And I was like, you never told me any of this. She's like, I just felt like it would be disrespectful or just like go in one ear out the other because you were so faithful. And I was like, you're probably right. So she got me. She also lives far away and she also has very different lifestyle. She's in a very different point in her life than I am right now. I kind of want to like meet people and make friends with people who are in a similar point in their life, whether they've left the church or maybe they're still in it, just like moms who have kids, and just maybe people who like to read and go out and do fun things sometimes and travel and do stuff with our kids together and all these things. I do have some family who lives really close to us, which is nice, but they also kind of left the church. I think all of their records are still in the church, but they kind of stepped away as well. So there was some common ground, I think, where we kind of comfortably did that together in a way, but we landed in different spots that can maybe still cause like, I don't know. I have a lot of fun with them. I love them and I'm really close with them and everything. I don't know. I'm kind of wondering if maybe there's just like a certain barrier that hasn't come down yet. Maybe for me, I still feel like I'm not my true like 100% authentic self sometimes. Lastly, I just want to let everybody know that if you're going through a similar experience, that like I'm here, I hear ya. Like you can DM me on Instagram or message on the comments below. I know how hard it can be. I will straight up Marco Polo strangers if you need somebody to talk to and you don't have anybody. I would happily be, a listening ear and an understanding person to chat with you about it. And I feel you. I'm so sorry that you're experiencing this right now. And I hope that my content can bring a level of comfort to you in your time of need. If this video resonates with any of you, please share it with anyone else you think would love to hear this message, and just anyone you feel you could benefit from listening to it. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and like this video. We are on our way to 1,000 subscribers, and I'll be able to finally monetize my content, and that just means I get to start making money from ads on my videos once I have 1,000 subscribers. And I'd love to be able to support my family in that way and still stay home and be with my kids and share this content with you guys and continue producing new and better content and reinvesting that money that I make into making better content. So hopefully you guys will all do that for me if you enjoyed this video, and I hope you come back to next week's video where we will be deconstructing the CES letter in episode 3, going over the section, the Book of Abraham. So stay tuned for that. I love you guys so much. I'm so appreciative, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.